Learn the most empowering hiring techniques. Land the most desirable talent. Launch your company towards massive success. This is the Higher Power Radio Show with your host, Rick Girard.
All right, a CEO I worked with called me in June and said, Rick, we hit the $1 million mark and we're stuck. Now, if I could just hire 3 more me's, we'd be fine. I had to tell him the hard truth, which is you don't need more of you. You need more people you're missing, those who augment your weaknesses. Now, he was also in a mad hurry to delegate recruiting to someone else on his team but the truth is he really needed to take ownership. Now, we focused on recruiting and got him to commit to 40% of his job focusing on recruiting. We clarified what the business actually needed. And then we rebuilt the hiring process to prioritize real world discovery over interview theater. Now that's when the flywheel started to move. 3 months later, he's built 80% of his team, and they are highly effective in building the business together. And they are quickly approaching the $2 million mark. Now I'm Rick Girard, and welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show. We help entrepreneurs and executives win the strongest people. We do so by sharing insights from top performing rebel entrepreneurs, game changers, and industry leaders like our guest today, Mr. Justin Gray. Now, Justin is the managing partner of In Revenue Capital. In 2021, after his final exit as an operator, Justin co-founded In Revenue Capital as the firm's he co-founded In Revenue Capital. As the firm's managing partner, Justin and his team couple GTM expertise with capital allocation to empower seed stage B2B vertical SaaS standouts through a first of its kind model called Operator Immersive Capital. Now, Justin himself is an award-winning 5-time entrepreneur and CEO, has made a career of launching and scaling companies, ultimately guiding them to successful exits of over $250 million, which is what makes Justin the perfect expert for today's topic. Justin, welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show today.
Hey, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. All right, so as most people who listen to the show know, this is kind of a problem solution show, and you've got a really unique kind of view of building companies because you've built them and then now you're funding them, right? So let's talk about building an effective team, especially like at that starting point when you first kind of start out, right? So if you can share with me like what you see or what you've experienced through your journey as both an operator and a venture capitalist.
Yeah, thanks. A great kind of opener there because so we don't just invest in seed stage and early stage companies. We also participate in them under, primarily go to market, but really across the business because everything really blends together in early stage companies. So, we are operating day to day, helping our portfolio companies understand how to get to market, how to create scalable processes, and of course, how to hire the best people, which tends to be I find a bit of an afterthought. So to your question, when a role becomes vacant or it's time to expand a team, like that tends to be where we see folks hop in and kind of start addressing that acute pain. The best organizations, and certainly what I found to be, my own key to success in that area is you have to be constantly hiring, right? Like you're building up this cache of relationships that hopefully you can dip into when the time is right and you're already aligned, thematically, culturally. They understand what you're about, and you can give them an opportunity that probably is pretty unique. So I would say the challenge that, and I've said this many times about our model, like we do a lot with our portfolio companies, but if you peel everything back, the thing that we could do that would be most impactful, the one thing I would keep would absolutely be recruiting and hiring assistants. And I think that's just because a lot of people haven't had to do that until the problem is front and center right in front of them.
Gosh, that's such a great point because as a recruiter back in when I was a recruiter, right now I have my own tech startup, but as a recruiter, it would always be more of an oh shit moment as opposed to a like, hey, let's cultivate relationships and let's like proactively go out and find people and
Hmm.
talk to them on a regular basis so that like when the timing's appropriate, I've got 3 or 4 people to reach out to that could potentially be a fit.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that you have to do proactively,
Yeah.
or you suffer the consequences that I feel like almost every early stage organization does organically, which is wrong, it takes a long time to hire for that role, or you get the wrong individual in the role, you've got a high degree of turnover, the opportunity cost is huge. I mean, the well-worn path of failure is one that I feel a lot of organizations identify with and kind of experience. If you're out there really dedicating proactive pieces of your time to meeting individuals just across the board, and then obviously picking and choosing folks that you feel like would eventually be a great member of the team, and really keeping that relationship warm. That the outcome of that is head and shoulders above the rest.
That is so very true. Now talk to me about, your experience with founders trying to copy photocopy. I mean, like trying to hire photocopies of themselves, right? Like
Yep.
that's been or a
I mean,
photocopy of
I've done that.
one of their high performers, right? Like this
Yeah.
happens almost all the time. I need somebody like Jim.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, obviously, like the example is right in front of you, and I feel like hey, I just wish there were more of me narrative, and I've said that narrative early stage, at the early points of my career, is obviously like you see and experience how much work you are doing, and you feel like, hey, I'm wearing all these different hats, and I just need that degree of efficiency, or I need that amount of output in someone else. I just wish I could just clone myself, and so you start hiring for folks that look like yourself or at least exhibit some of those traits. And at least, I've found that to be an absolute recipe for failure. I don't need more of me. I need folks that like fill the gaps that I naturally have from a personality standpoint, from an operation standpoint, from a thought process standpoint. Uh, when we talked a couple of weeks ago, I know that, like I mentioned, like my number two and three in the last organization I sold, like those were some of the most contentious folks that I had with on my executive team. They thought very different than I did. They, looked at things from a different perspective. They came up with different solutions, and together, kind of in that I wouldn't even say compromise, but in that discussion, and in the process of really pouring over different points of views, like we would, I feel certainly like come up with the absolute best approach or outcome there. And you don't really see how powerful that can be until you've fostered that within your own organization. And again, time and time again, I see like companies develop, the DNA of their founder. And a lot of times, if left unchecked, that can be a really negative thing. If you've got like a really, kind of ringleader, sales centric, very, outspoken founder, the index of that organization very much goes in that direction. And I've got examples that I'm thinking of right now, even as I'm saying this. And then what happens to the other end of that spectrum? And when that pendulum doesn't swing back, you end up with a lot of gap in process. You end up with a lot of blind spots around conservative aspects and maybe compliance if that's an area of the business. You just skip over pieces where you don't have that focus in your own personality. So I found that variance there is so critical. And then when you think about, hey, that represents my buyer, that represents the market that I'm trying to sell into. Not everyone that is, my customer looks like and thinks like me. So how am I not serving them by not kind of filling a broad spectrum of mentality there? So I think there's a lot of directions it can go, but I've seen it pay off in huge ways.
What have you seen that's worked from a perspective of a core team, right? How many people do you need that are I agree with you 100%, unlike you. You don't need another you.
Mhm.
Um, but what do you need? You and one other person, three? I kind of like the tripod kind of scenario.
I think it
Um,
depends on the business, obviously, right? Like what are the if you're thinking about typical C-suite, like you're going to have someone who runs a dimension of the business, and like what I've found, I really like smaller businesses, right? Like 250 employees and less. And typically that looks like somewhere between 3 and 5 individuals. Like you don't want this, just dog pile of discussion and bureaucracy. At the same time, you don't want to be making decisions in a silo. So I think
Yeah.
it's great to have different folks representing just different areas of the business that tend to think very differently.
All right, you're listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. For our podcast listeners, we're going to take a quick educational moment from our sponsors. All right, I'm digging in deeper with our guest today, Justin Gray. Justin is the managing partner of In Revenue Capital, and we're talking a little bit about, kind of building out an effective core team. He's got a really unique breadth of experience in that he's built out 5 companies, and he's also a venture capitalist now. So he helps other people do this. So let's talk about how you recommend to or actually how you have built out a team, and how you kind of recommend to solve that problem for the companies that you fund.
Yeah, so I think unfortunately the answer becomes really simplistic and it sounds just really straightforward, and that's kind of the thing about hiring, right? Like when we don't focus on it until it's kind of already too late, we realize how easy this would have been to get ahead of. But I mean, you have
Yeah.
to figure out what what organization am I building here? Who am I looking for? What are the traits that really succeed within this environment? Where do I find those individuals? Just the entire like planning process. And you're going to iterate on that, right? But like you're going to have some element of benchmark. You're going to throw out a first process, and then you're going to evolve according to first principles. So like, just what do I actually need in this organization? As I mentioned before, like I'm a big fan of looking for weaknesses and gaps in the business, and you can start to see those emerge. If you've got revenue, you can see those emerge if you've got your eyes open. And then I think, in line, this entire process really follows what I consider to be like a very typical go to market or even a marketing type campaign, which is, all right, who do we focus on? What's our ICP in relation to this exercise? Where am I going to find them? Like, how do I segment and look for these audiences? And ultimately, how am I going to evaluate them against the core principles that we say we're looking for, right? And so I'd say that's kind of the 1, 2, 3 in that process. We can certainly dive deeper on those, but
For sure.
just having that thought out, you're already ahead of the game if you're doing that early on.
Okay, so you got a bunch to impact there, but let's start with kind of like the gap analysis, right? Because I find a lot of companies just they hire for pain, right? Like, I don't have
Mhm.
anybody doing marketing. I need a marketer. Well, and I need somebody who's got a lot of experience. So let's go director or VP of marketing. Like it's just a
Sure.
guess, right?
Mhm.
Um, do you have a process by which you recommend, or that you've gone through with your business, in which, like, how do we identify the gaps, and then how do we determine what the role really needs to be?
Yep. So I think, first and foremost, even if you feel like you've got your thumb on the answer to that question, right? Like you still need to go through the process of information gathering. And I'd say there are 2 segments of folks that really matter. One, your existing team. Like, where are we weak? Where are we strong? What do we need? If we had, let's call it, say, $100,000. Like, if we had $100,000 to spend, what would we spend it on tomorrow? And just gather that info. Same
Yeah,
thing, slightly different bent from a customer standpoint. Like, what has the process been like? How is our support or service? Obviously depends on the business, but like, where are we lacking? Where could we be stronger? And take those inputs in addition to what you're perceiving in the business, because I find that a lot of founders do have a really great pulse on their organization. But to your point earlier, like it's very easy to index on like we need more revenue, like we're just going to go hire another seller without maybe taking in some of those signals. If you're not supporting the customers that you have today already, adding more revenue to that mix is going to be more of a problem than a solution. So I feel like just getting that feedback, absolutely job one.
for sure. Now, you have the belief that the CEO should always be involved in the hiring process.
Certainly.
How do you advise on that?
I mean, there's a point where you're going to have to let go of some of that, but I think that point is far larger than most people would articulate.
What
And
size company do I need to be for me to hand that off?
Yeah, I mean, like from a revenue standpoint, I think anything less than 100 million, like you belong within, participating at some degree in that hiring process. And obviously, I think it's a great double check, even if your teams are out there recruiting and getting candidates to that kind of fairly endpoint, and just have the CEO come in and really determine, is this person aligned with our core principles and where we want to go as a business. I think from a headcount perspective, you're probably looking at, $100 million in revenue. You're probably looking at, 200 employees, 250 employees. That's sliding the other direction with the rise of AI, right? And I think that's a really exciting aspect even to bring to hiring. But
For sure.
the point is, the more you can participate in that process, and the great stories you always hear are always about the CEO of an extremely large organization behaving like a very early stage organization. So the more that you can keep that as part of your DNA, I think, for the longest period of time possible, the better.
Yeah, you know what? I've seen a tendency for entrepreneurs and um to want to hand it off like way too early,
Mhm.
right? Want to hire an
A lot
HR
of people don't like
person.
hiring, right? And
Yeah,
you can kind of understand that.
but but it's actually critical to the organization that you are the person who's doing it, especially I would argue when you're under 20. When you're like 20
Sure.
people or under, you've got to be the one like leading the charge. You've got to be the one who's essentially doing the recruiting on a daily basis. I
I
started
mean,
doing Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, I'm fortunate enough to have a ton of great employees in my history, right? Like one of them put a post up the other day because she actually left the organization that we all exited together. I stepped out after that. She's been with them for, I think it was 9 years. She put up, like, I met her at a local. So I'm in Arizona. Like I met her at Phoenix Startup Week 9 years ago. I gave a talk. She came up, talked to me afterwards. I connected her immediately with the individual who I thought was hiring for a role that would fit her well. I was, involved in that hiring process towards probably the last third of that hiring process. But my point is, like, there is no better articulation of the spirit, the goals, the outsized value solution you're bringing to market than the CEO, right? And so every place that you go is an opportunity to recruit and to meet great people. So I think, the more you can have that kind of masthead up there and just kind of, again, be bringing in folks that are interesting, are smart, are obviously, creative, like just building that pool up, and then that becomes your hiring pool rather than putting out a job posting on LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever people use these days. Like that's manna from heaven. That's what everyone wants. It's like, hey, I've already got a bunch of people that are kind of already bought into where we're going. Yeah, I want to hire from that pool.
Yeah. And the truth is when you're a small company that nobody's heard of, you're not a name brand.
Hmm.
He wants to like we all want to post up on LinkedIn and have great people respond, but like you're really not a company that anybody knows about. And quite
Right.
frankly, like they don't care. And the challenge is that you don't get passive talent. You might get
Right.
lucky if you've got a really well written ad, but most ads like basically look like everybody else's. Um,
That's a great point too.
so
Don't do that.
yeah, right. Um, so what I've been doing, and I've done this for quite a few years, is I have this practice that I just created a like a Google sheet. I figured out what my org gaps are based on my org chart,
Hmm.
and I do this thing called filling the funnel. So every Friday, I just pick one of the roles and I go through LinkedIn and I reach out to passive people who are not looking for jobs that are working for companies that I think I'd like to poach them out of at some point. And it's just a quick reach out. I do an hour and a half of, hey, I'm the CEO of this company. Um, would love to talk to you for the future. I don't have a
Hmm.
need for you right now, but like we should get to know each other for, when you are ready. And I get a really high response rate from that, probably about 60%.
Sure.
And
It's uncommon, right? Like
yeah,
it's something, probably a lot different than the normal spam that you get, on LinkedIn every day. To that point, like everything becomes a recruiting opportunity. If you're out speaking, if you're out, at a show, if you're at a customer location, like there's things going on in wherever that is, right? Like get plugged into that ecosystem, make it an opportunity to share with people what makes you unique. I think, again, like I'm in Arizona, so like I'll give an Arizona example. Like there's a tech startup here called Trainual, which is a great example, like does a great example of this. Like they do all those channels. They have a spot on their website that basically says like, hey, if you don't see the position that you want right now, drop us a line. We'd love to talk to you about, just get to know you and see if you might be a fit in the future. So they've got
Yeah.
all these feeders coming in. And then what they do that's really interesting and really different is they actually nurture those folks. It's not just like sending them a newsletter every quarter, right? Like they're staying in contact with them, they're curating that crop. And then eventually when that position comes to, comes time to hire, they not only have a great group of folks, but they know exactly like, hey, these are the folks that are interested in that project manager role or in that engineer role or whatever it happens to be. I think that's, to your point, those proactive outreaches just, make your job so much easier when
They
you
make your
do have that
life so
acute
much
need.
easier,
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so talk to me about process. So, the interview process is always one of those things where you invite somebody in, you have a conversation, you meet for coffee. And this is something I battled with for a very, very long time, which is what forced me to kind of create an interview process.
Hmm.
But I once had Justin, a CEO, hire a C-level executive, a CTO, based on a 45-minute conversation about the Oakland A's, their favorite baseball team.
How
And he
was
was
that?
right. And by the way, that didn't work out.
I was
Surprise.
gonna say.
Yeah. Um, as a matter of fact, that was probably the worst hire ever made. And I believe like that person ran out two of the high performing engineers and almost shut down the business. It ended up costing the business probably about like just under $1 million, like in 6 months. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
I mean, you think about the opportunity cost of bad hires, and it gets pretty surprising pretty quickly.
Oh
So,
yeah.
I mean, but the fundamental, and to your point, like I find a lot of folks index on about two conversations is what I find is kind of the natural behavior. Like, oh, we did kind of this first like culture fit. To your point, maybe we talked about baseball the entire time, and then the next one we kind of went deeper into the weeds, and then we extended an offer. And it's like that's crazy because the only way that you're truly going to understand how someone is going to perform, there's two options. Number one, they're referred by someone that is already within your organization. They've worked with them. They know they've done the exact job that you need them to do. They know how they think, how they work, so on and so forth. They're going to be a fit. And even then, things don't work out. But like you've got that perspective. The other one is to actually work with the person, which certainly, like if you can find, the magic intersection of that marriage, absolutely do it. Like, hey, if someone's willing to come on for, you know, 45, 60 days and do like a mini internship or something like that. But a lot of people, unfortunately, like are either not in the financial position to do that, or they might be giving up opportunity at other places for taking themselves out of the job market. So, if that's not possible, you have to try to recreate as much of that proxy for day-to-day operation in that role during the hiring process, as humanly possible. And so I think, in terms of process, you want different folks in your org speaking to them, but you really want them, to map out ahead of time. What are we looking for in that candidate? Hopefully we spelled that out at that, as our first step. And then how are we going to dig at that information? And it can't obviously, this is the unfortunate situation that has happened in hiring. Like both people in the room are sitting across from a liar, right? Like the company is going to say all the best things about their business. They're probably not going to give you the warts and all look at it. The candidate, is only serving up their wins. They're never going to serve up a bad a reference. Everyone, is getting this false facade of the other individual. And so you have to create questions and scenarios and just practicals are huge to translate those traits that you're looking for. Might be things like grit, determination, curiosity, emotional intelligence, whatever it is. Like, hey, do you have these things? Of course, everyone is going to say yes. Like, we have to dig deeper and ask questions that are really going to get at the heart of that. But more importantly, we highly encourage our portfolio companies to have practical exercises for every single role that they hire, which is like very common in development or engineering, highly less common in go to market, marketing, sales, just your softer positions, because it's hard to come up with an exercise that actually gives someone that insight. It's absolutely possible. And so the more that you can see that person in action, the more that you can involve different perspectives on how they approach that problem, or served up an answer, and then come together and really have those non-negotiables spelled out. How did they, did they react in the way that we're looking for? You have to have that, number one, agreed upon. And then did we, the questions that we asked them, did they align to, again, the values, the skill sets of that particular role? We need to have, and I hate to say like score sheet, because I've seen these processes get like very binary and just really cold and stale. But you do need to have an understanding of the traits and the types of responses that you're looking for. And then again, those non-negotiables, like what absolutely has to be there, and we don't want to bend or flex on those items. But certainly, if there's any way that you can see someone operate within that role, I would encourage any business to take that. Last item I would throw out there is like in person is so absolutely critical. Like at the very least, you're flying to their location. If the role is large enough, they're flying to yours. And you just need to, not only take the time to have those interview type interactions, but see them in a more relaxed setting, and be able to really understand how they interact with other folks. And, because again, they're putting on their best face to you. It's the age old, like, hey, does this person tip a waiter or waitress? Like I used to do this thing if someone came into our office where I would leave a piece of paper on the floor on the way to the conference room. I just wanted to see if people would pick it up, right? We're looking for those folks that make every situation better in some degree or another. And so, just having those spelled out, communicated amongst the team, have everyone weigh in, and then ultimately figure out like what the absolute must-haves are. And that process tends to be, again, longer than the knee-jerk reaction. I've seen folks do that kind of 1 to 3 web meeting or phone conversations. If that works out, frankly, you had great luck that time. I don't think it's going to work out in the long run.
I love the fact that you kind of went through all that. That was like a real lot of really good content. And just for full disclosure, you've never seen our product, but you were just talking commercial about interviewing
I've
what we
never
do.
seen the product.
Yeah, I know. Okay. So it's kind of interesting because like there are you're right. Like if you can tie questions back to measurable behaviors and then turn around and like I find that you said something that like I love to hear, which is you're sitting across the desk from another liar, which is so true because I think interviewing is probably the one place, like probably interviewing and cheaters are probably the two places that where you lie most in your life, right?
And it's like an agreed upon, tension that we create there. Like
Yeah,
what's every recruiter coach to do? Don't go to salary. Don't be the first one to talk. What's every candidate coach to do? The exact same thing. So like if we're both like dancing around telling the truth, how do we get to that truth? And I think that's the scenarios that you really have to create. The other thing that I forgot to mention that I'll throw in there is like there are a lot of frameworks to this. I've never seen it's kind of like sales methodology, right? Like if someone comes to me and says like, "Oh, I'm a big believer in Medic or Sandler or whatever it happens to be," it's like, okay. Like I instead want the person that's taken some aspects of each one of those things and said like, yeah, I blend them together in my own unique sauce. Same thing for hiring, i.e., like if you're a fan of Myers Briggs or DISC or whatever it happens to be, right? Like we used to give 2 of those types of surveys. We did do DISC and we did Myers-Briggs. And then we actually created our own. I was fortunate enough to have a data science team where we looked at our existing employees, figured out their personalities, figured out how they were operating within their role, and actually tried to optimize teams for those complementary skill sets and like what needed to be the same, what needed to be purposefully different. I don't think any of that is to say like go do those things. The point is you have to come up with your own secret sauce. and really figure out what matters to you and what tools you're going to leverage to, facilitate that visibility.
Hmm. Got it. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, just from the perspective of I've seen a lot of people come up with their own secret sauce and it sucks.
Yeah,
And
I
I
mean,
think it has
that's
to do
like
with
saying like, hey, I
yeah.
paid my uncle to build a house and it fell down, right? Like you have to like people that are even involved in that process
Yeah.
need to have again a skill set for hiring. And that to your point, like
Yeah.
that's something that we don't evaluate often, which is like, hey, just because you're in that role doesn't mean you're great at hiring for that role. And so that again, that gets back to like building teams. And it was awesome because I mean, like our head of data science was a um, uh, what is it? I can't think of how they phrase that, but he's a research psychologist. Thank you. And so like had a great psych background, and so that's why we liked some of the off the shelf stuff where some people are saying like, hey, this is impactful at finding these personality types and how they work together. And then we liked doing some of our own, but only because we had someone in house that like came up through a 12-year background in psychology, right? Um, so if you don't have those in house, like who else can I bring in that's an expert
Yeah.
in order to augment my process? Certainly.
Got it. Well, cool. Shoot, we're getting pretty close on time. Justin, as we wrap up here, what are 2 or 3 key takeaways you can give the audience that can plug into their business today?
I would say like ultimately, so we talked a lot about like how do you get to the bottom of that, and I think like the bottom of if someone's going to be a great fit for your organization, if they're going to be really successful in the role, like you have to again figure out how to decode those items. I find that what people say is far less important to what they do, and we've got to get them doing something. We have to get them applying that answer.
Yeah.
I mentioned like the trash on the floor thing, like that's a very like superficial example of that. But it's why I love, I'll give one more example because I think it's super important. So one of the practical exercises that we give to our portcos is a founding AE or an early seller hire, which is really difficult because sellers are great at selling themselves. And anytime there's a bad hire there, I always like my saying is, well, they sold the one person that mattered, which is the person that hired them, and they're not conducting any other sales, right? But
Yeah.
what we put in that material is literally a paragraph that says like, for this exercise, you can contact anyone related to this organization, the investors, the board, the executive team, the practitioners at the ground level. You could even contract customers. Just go through us first, and we'll make the introduction. But tell us who you want to speak to. And I would say 8.5 times out of 10, no one like they don't leverage any of those available avenues, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. Like someone that is going to take a swath across everyone, ask really interesting and informed questions of those folks to get insight into the person that they're ultimately selling to, which is the hiring team in that instance. So I think what people do is just absolutely so critical. I would say I'll just recap like finding a way to be an always on you know ringleader for your organization, being the hype man out there that's bringing talent to the table, that gets people excited about the opportunity, whether it's today or it's in the future. Like you've got to have someone playing that role. If that's not the CEO, because you've got a very introverted CEO who's maybe on the engineering side, great. Who is that individual? Someone needs to be playing that role.
Yep.
And then I would ultimately say how you treat those folks once they're in the door is a window into your organization. You're giving them a lens into why, who you really are, why they'd want to work there. I've incubated folks for, God, a decade before we ever worked together before. And like that is a very intentional process. Obviously, it's not happening every day, but every 3-6 months, I would reach out. Hey, just where are you at? Yeah, I still want to find an opportunity. And I mentioned the research psychologist there. That was my college freshman year in college roommate, and we both went off, had our own careers, and then had kind of done that process throughout the entire impeding 15 years, and then finally found the opportunity to bring him in and work together. That's the type of long-term thinking that really shows in successful recruiting.
Justin, thanks so much for your time investment today. And I want to welcome you to the Higher Power Radio community. what would be the best way in which members of the audience can find you, find your company?
LinkedIn is always the best way to find me. I mean, like my email's right on our website. You can go to inrevenue.com, but LinkedIn, very active. Reach out. I will respond as long as it's not like a blatant sales message. Please don't do that. But if you're looking for assistance, help, I'm happy to interact.
Awesome.
And
Well,
thanks
thank
for
you for
having me.
taking.
Really appreciate it.
Oh, dude, you've been awesome. Thank you for sharing all this wisdom, and I really appreciate both of your views on everything, man. All right. Well, I want to thank you for tuning this week's episode of Higher Power Radio. Huge thanks to our team, Brian Colburn, Andrea Ballin, and Ayla Gerard. If you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe, review, and share. After all, this show is for you, and we want to continue to bring you valuable content week after week. You can check us out further at Hire, H-I-R-E, Power, P-O-W-E-R, radio, R-A-D-I-O.com, or you can drop me an email at rick@intertru, intertru.ai. I'm your host, Rick Gerard, and you have been listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. Aloha.
Thank you for listening to Higher Power Radio. Catch our LinkedIn Live show every Tuesday at noon, or download the podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate you joining us on Higher Power Radio with your guide to hiring success, Rick Gerard.